Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Faster Payments, Faster Fraud, Solutions to Stop the Madness. Before I formally introduce our presenters for today's webinar, there are a few housekeeping notes I'd like to begin with. During the webinar, you will be able to ask questions by typing those into the chat feature indicated by the question mark icon to your right. We will do our best to answer those questions at the end of the presentation during our Q&A session. If we are unable to answer those questions during the webinar, we will follow up with you directly. In addition, following the webinar, you will receive an email that will provide you with a direct link to access the slides, the ITA report, and the recording. I am very excited and happy to introduce our two speakers for today's webinar, Julie Conroy and Scott Olson. Julie Conroy is the head of Risk Insights and Advisory at ITA Navarica Group. Prior to her time there, Julie spent several years leading the product management team at Early Warning Services, and prior to that was in product and process management roles at a large credit card issuer, as well as ACH, Wire, and Swift Processor. Julie is fluent in Spanish, holds an MA from the Monterey Institute of International Studies, and a BA from the Michigan State University Honors College. Joining Julie today is co-presenter Scott Olson. Scott Olson is our Chief Marketing Officer at Outseer, who leads the global marketing team. Prior to Outseer, Scott led marketing and product teams at multiple businesses like TransUnion and iovation. He holds his MBA from University of Texas at Austin and a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Duke University. Welcome to the both of you, and we will begin with you, Julie. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks for everybody's time today. Looking forward to the discussion, and thanks for spending an hour of your valuable time with us. So we spent a good amount of time interviewing issuers and financial institutions across a number of different countries to understand the challenges associated with faster payments and faster payments fraud. So I'll start by going through kind of the faster payments landscape. We'll talk about the attack vectors, and then we'll also talk about the best practices that we heard from these financial institutions to create some meaningful change. After that, I will turn it over to Scott, who will share his perspective on some of the solutions that he sees that can be brought to bear against these issues. So for those of us that are sitting in North America watching this today, we have been slower to join the faster payments party. The UK, as in so many things, was kind of on the forefront of faster payments. Their solution launched in 2008. By 2021, 39% of business-to-business transactions were going across faster payments rails. And as of Q1 2023, even though faster payments has been in the UK for so long, they were still seeing 16% year-over-year growth in faster payments. As you look at India, they launched their faster payment rails in 2016. By 2022, faster payments were enabling 64% of all of e-commerce in India, as well as 31% of all of the payment volume, which is just amazing growth in a very short period of time. Now, here in the US market, we always have to do things a little bit differently. So we have multiple faster payment rails, and we've got another one coming soon with FedNow in the July-ish of 2023. Zelle, which depending on the bank's choice of settlement mechanisms, the consumer experience is faster payments. The settlement can be either going across ACH or RTP rails, but by 2022, Zelle had 2.3 billion payments going across. RTP, it's still coming on. It's only 1.2% of the US volume today. But I do think that we will see accelerating adoption of faster payments in the US market over the months and years to come. And then Brazil, Brazil is a really interesting case. So Brazil launched its faster payments rail called Pix in November of 2020. As of Q2 of 2022, 27% of all of cash transfers in Brazil were going across the Pix rails. And within a year of launching Pix, it eclipsed card payments in terms of volume. So amazing adoption in Brazil. I think there's a couple of things that you can attribute to that. Part of it is similar to India. Brazil is working towards a universal banking mandate, ensuring that all of its citizens are banked citizens. And as it was dispersing stimulus payments during the pandemic in late 2020, early 2021, the vast majority of those payments were going across Pix, which very much helped to spur adoption of Pix in that market. It's cliche, but unfortunately also true. With faster payments, you also see faster fraud. And the fraudsters have been very much, following the 60 countries that now have faster payment rails across the globe and deploying their tried and true tactics, which they pretty much honed to an art in the UK market. And now they're rinsing and repeating those types of tactics across the globe. Now, the one thing I see that is encouraging from these particular stats here, this comes out of the UK market, and they do an amazing job of tracking their fraud. It's requisite for banks to report their fraud losses up to UK Finance. They have some pretty well-defined definitions for that. Being somebody in the US market, I've definitely got a little bit of metrics envy for what the UK is doing on this front. The bit of good news that I see in this is that for the first time since the UK started tracking authorized push payment fraud, or APP fraud, it came down last year. And I think this is a testament to the multiple things that the UK market is deploying. And there's no silver bullet, but they are deploying multiple different tactics to try to both educate consumers as well as detect the fraud on the send side, as well as detect the fraud on the receive side. And the confluence of those is actually starting to work. So as we look at faster payments fraud, I think this is a glimmer of hope out there. Yeah, what we saw also with the pandemic, it wasn't just about fraudsters defunding stimulus programs, which they did in ample degree, but it was also we saw an acceleration to digital transformation. And while in some cases that's great news, financial institutions, financial services providers have been trying to accelerate digital adoption for years. The pandemic served as an ample boost for that. We conducted at IT Novarka Group a consumer survey asking consumers about the extent to which they had tried new digital channels or new digital products like P2P or mobile remote deposit capture during the pandemic, and the extent to which they intended to stick with those behaviors. And of those that had tried these things for the first time, the vast majority of consumers realized, wow, this is super easy. It's really convenient. We're gonna stick with these digital behaviors. So while that's good news from a digital transformation perspective, it also presents expanded attack surface for the criminals. And as you can see from this really interesting data from Outseer, as you look at the number of fraudulent transactions that come from a trusted account plus a new device, there's a significant uptick in fraud associated with that particular combination. And 77% of fraudulent activities originated from the mobile channel in Q4 of 2022, again, according to Outseer's view on this data. So this kind of goes to show that while digitalization gives us lots of opportunity from a efficiency and a meeting the customer where they want to be perspective, it also gives the bad guy opportunity as well. And the fraudsters are attacking these digital channels in a very organized fashion. One of my friends that leads fraud for one of the large North American banks, calls them Fraud Inc. And they very much are. This is operating as a business with P&L objectives. And as you look into the dark web, which is a shot from this data, again, presented by Outseer, is, you can see that, as you are looking into the accounts available for purchase on the dark web, one of the key attributes that you see associated with these accounts is whether or not this account is enabled for real-time payments, be it wire transfer or be it Zelle. But there's a recognition that real-time payments, faster fraud, gives the criminals a better opportunity to steal quickly and exit the funds from the system quickly, so it doesn't have a shot to be clawed back. And as you look at the associated prices when you are looking to buy these accounts on the dark web, those that are enabled for faster payment mechanisms garner a higher premium because they have higher fraud opportunity associated with them. We do see that fraud using real-time payment rails is sharply rising year over year. So in this particular survey, where we, this was the survey of financial institutions across 5 countries, the one I described at the top of the hour, we do see that those sorts of fraud leveraging real-time payment rails kind of surface to the top of this chart. We're seeing that mule activity using real-time payment rails has increased significantly year over year for a number of the institutions that we interviewed. 38% said that mule activity using real-time payments is up 25% or more. That's kind of a massive increase. As you look at ATO, account takeover, that was up 71% for financial institutions. And again, as you look at 2022 compared to the prior 2 years, where fraudsters in 2020, 2021 were very focused on defrauding stimulus, once the stimulus dried up, they were very much back to kind of their tried and true tactics, unfortunately, in 2022. And as we have talked at IT Novarica Group to our financial institution clients, pretty much universally, people said that 2022 was an incredibly painful year from a fraud attack vector perspective. Even with all of kind of these fraud attacks, it was interesting to me that as we asked the financial institutions that we were interviewing about whether they believe that the utility of faster payment rails outweigh the risks, as you can see here, the majority, 57%, do believe that the benefits of real-time payment rails do outweigh the risks. Definitely was not a universal sentiment. 29% of those that we asked that question disagreed with that. And I think, we're starting to see that as financial institutions, as consumers, as regulators are getting more accustomed to the dynamics of faster payments and the risks associated with them, there's a recognition that faster payments don't always have to be faster. So I did a webinar last month with somebody from one of the Australian banks. And this particular executive who's in a risk function said that it's now become kind of commonplace among the large Australian banks to slow down faster payments if the P2P payment exceeds a certain dollar amount. And so if the P2P payment exceeds $500, then it probably won't be faster. It might go the next day, just to make sure that that customer has a chance for buyer remorse. There's actually a large U.S. bank that is doing something similar. It's they're only putting a 4-hour delay on faster payment transactions for consumers, but they are delaying it by 4 hours if it exceeds a certain dollar amount. They're also sending a text to that consumer to make sure that they've really thought about what they wanted to do. So I think as we continue to progress down these faster payment types of things, we're going to see some experimentation along these lines to figure out ways that we can still serve our customer but slow down the fraudster. As we surveyed financial institutions, there was a strong belief that faster payments will continue their rapid pace of growth. I do see that, as you look at different markets, the regional market dynamics will influence that path of growth. As you look at countries like Brazil and India, where you have a very strong central bank that has, put forth policies like universal banking, created incentives like sending stimulus payments through those faster payment rails, that is definitely contributing to a faster adoption of faster payments. More fragmented markets like the US, we're definitely going to be slower in this market to adopt, and then also just some of the connectors. In Brazil, from launch, they had a connector into WhatsApp, which is heavily used in Brazil. And from a WhatsApp, you can send a payment to anybody that's in your network. And so, some of those just kind of social networking types of things definitely help with adoption as well. As we look at the various attack vectors that ride along faster payment rails, there are two primary and very different attack vectors. The first is the scams attack vector, or as one of my colleagues has coined the term very appropriately, the scampocalypse, because it is just such a massive problem across the globe right now. This is people voluntarily sending authorized payments from their account to a fraudster. And that is really hard to detect because financial services firms have spent 15 years creating fraud control frameworks that are looking to detect unauthorized activity or account takeover. Both of these attack vectors are absolutely leveraging faster payment rails. And so we'll unpack a little bit of that over the next few slides here. Not all scams are created equal. We do see that there are some scams like the targeting the grandparent. Your grandson is in jail. You need to send bail money to this account now. There's also scams that have the similar sense of urgency, like this is the tax authority, and you haven't paid your back taxes, and we're going to foreclose on your property if you don't send money to this account now. Those create a very they're all of scams tug on emotional heartstrings, but these create a sense of urgency. There's others that play the long game. The dating scam is a perfect example of this, where the fraudster is cultivating the victim and nurturing that relationship with the victim until they go for the big hit. And your method of detection and intervention on those different types of scams will differ. Few of the FIs that we interviewed are confident in their APP control frameworks today. So as we asked folks, about the extent to which they believe that their controls sufficiently detect and prevent scam or authorized push payment fraud attacks on their customers, as you can see here, only 24% felt like they had confidence in that control framework. The majority of folks do not believe that they have that level of maturity today. And it's difficult to fight what you can't measure. And so as we asked the financial institutions that we interviewed about their ability to capture, track, and report on authorized push payment claims, The good news in this data was, 60% of folks said that they have the ability to do this. It did vary dramatically by market. And so as you looked at, the institutions that we interviewed in the US and Canadian markets specifically, there were pretty low rates of capability in those markets. In the UK and Brazil, it's a requirement. You have to report on this stuff to the regulator. So everybody we interviewed in those markets had the ability, could report on it. We're reporting it to the regulator. In markets where you don't have that requirement, we did not see quite that level of detailed discipline, and also, I think we're struggling with different definitions in markets where you don't have a strong regulatory infrastructure dictating that you have to do this. And a bit of a disappointing thing for me is when we ask the follow-up question of those that do not have the ability to capture, track, and report today, less than half of those that we asked plan to develop the capability to do so over the next 1 to 2 years. As we interviewed folks about, kind of the business case for deploying controls against scams specifically, liability shifts were very much a key concern. So in the UK, we saw the contingent liability shift that shifted liability for consumer scam-based fraud hit in May of 2019. This was positioned as a voluntary liability shift, but I presented with one of the heads of fraud of one of the big 4 UK banks a few months after this hit. And he said that this was the least voluntary liability shift that anybody has ever seen. The regulators were heavily pressuring the large UK banks to participate in this. There is a regulation from the Payment Services Regulator, PSR, that is currently working its way through the UK Parliament. As we talk to a number of our contacts over there, the general consensus is that this will probably go into effect Q1 of 2024 in the UK, and this will result in shared liability, 50-50 liability for scams for the sending bank as well as the receiving bank. In Brazil, we saw a liability shift in November of 2022. This one essentially just shifted liability from the consumer over to the sending bank in the case of scams. In the US, it's the timing is still TBD, but we do see that at Nacha Payments last month, the CFPB said from stage that we could probably expect a liability shift to take place in this market in the next 12 months. So, all of this kind of shifting liability is definitely serving as a powerful motivator for financial institutions to look to do more, both on the send side as well as the receiving side of faster payments. And with all of this noise that we've seen in the liability space around faster payments, we definitely have seen a significant shift in reimbursement policies in just 1 year in North America. It was interesting. We asked this question, as you can see, in fourth quarter of last year, around what firms' policies were for reimbursing consumer scam victims. And as you can see, it's over half of financial institutions that will reimburse some portion of consumer scam claims. We asked this exact same question in a piece of research that we did in late 2021. And at that point, it was well less than half of financial institutions in similar size groups, similar size ranges that were doing this reimbursement. So I think there's a broad recognition that the writing is on the wall here, and what starts in the UK isn't going to stop in the UK. So we are going to see shifts to liability come, and many institutions are starting to take proactive stances to get ahead of that. the unfortunate thing with scams in particular is, as we talk to our financial institution clients here at IT Novarica, as we do a number of surveys, customer education is typically one of the things at the top of the list that financial institutions are focusing on as they are trying to get ahead of the scam apocalypse. But while the vast majority of financial institutions are trying to do some sort of education of their customers, it's not resonating. It's not sinking in. So this is a survey of consumers that we did last year, asking them, have you received education about scams from any of these different sources? And again, with the knowledge that the vast majority of financial institutions are putting education out there, only 28% of consumers believe that they have ever seen that from their financial institution, which just it underscores the fact that what we're doing isn't working. We need to get better at it. Again, going back to take a page out of the UK book, they've been going down this path of the scam apocalypse much longer than we have. And, they started with kind of the soft white glove approach to education that I think we're primarily taking in the North American market right now. And they've gotten much more in your face about it because it is such a big problem there. Scam losses are right about at par with payment card losses in the UK right now. And so, their education is a little bit more edgy. It's actually using a good amount of humor to try to get consumers' attention. And again, based on some of those numbers that we showed earlier about the fact that scam losses are starting to come down, I would take that as a sign that maybe some of this is actually working over there. So as we look at what makes scams so problematic and some of the headwinds to maturity, I would equate kind of our scam defensive posture right now to where we were back in 2009, 2010 with account takeover. As account takeover attacks became industrialized and started coming against financial institutions and their customers in full force, the defensive ecosystem was still pretty nascent at that point. And I would say that we're in the same place today with the scams defensive ecosystem. We haven't necessarily had the incentives to invest in scams until it became an epidemic issue, because financial institutions up until recently didn't have the liability for those losses. The signals, again, our signal infrastructure has been directed towards unauthorized activity. We need to develop a new set of signal infrastructure that is directed around both authorized activity on the send side, but also more, equally importantly, or more importantly, looking at the anomalous activity on the receive side, because all of these funds typically are going into a mule account, and it's actually it's easier to detect that anomalous mule account activity than it is to figure out what the intent of a consumer's authorized push payment send is. And on both sides of the equation, modeling can be extremely helpful. And, the good news is we're rapidly accelerating on that front in terms of performance. As we look at account takeover, as we ask the financial institutions about their confidence in their ATO controls, this one was actually a little bit surprising for me because, as I said, we've been dealing with industrialized ATO for going on 15 years now. But as we asked folks about their ability to sufficiently detect and prevent ATO attacks, only 43% were confident in their control framework. So I think this really shows the extent to which this fraud game that we play is this lopsided game of chess, where the bad guys have 2 to 3 moves for every one move that the good guys have, and they are just bringing so much to bear in terms of the the vast amount of data that has been compromised, the industrialization and the automation of their attacks. Bring ChatGPT into their tool of weapons against us at this point, which can create the ability to create very sophisticated phishing and smishing campaigns with, again, a great degree of automation. So it just shows that there's still a lot of room for improvement on something as tried and true as ATO as well. And as you look at, it's not all about technology, it's also about policy-based controls. So as we asked folks about the extent to which they are using policy-based controls, as you can see here, we gave people the opportunity to select multiple choices, and canceling the transaction, performing a stepped-up authentication, or holding the transaction, all of those are viable options, but not always scalable. So especially around the hold the transaction until it can be manually validated. This was one of the key controls that folks were using for things that seemed like they might have an authorized push payment scam risk associated with it. But almost to the person of all of the FIs that we interviewed, they were saying, we're doing this for now, but this is not going to be long-term viable, because as the volume grows, we can't do this forever. And again, with scams, performing a stepped-up authentication of the user, that doesn't work. That works with ATO, doesn't work with scams, because it is the genuine user that is sending this transaction. So as we look at some of the best practices that we see out there, we do see that there is a concerted plan to make upgrades to the real-time payments control frameworks that financial services firms have over the next 1 to 2 years. 67%, 2 and 3 of the banks that we interviewed do plan to make these substantial upgrades. This was another interesting point for me. So one of the things that we always ask financial institutions as we're doing these types of surveys is, as you're forming a business case to upgrade your control framework, what are the key business case drivers? What are the things that are getting this across the finish line for you? And pretty consistently for the last 5, 6, 7 years, as we've asked questions like these across our various surveys, customer experience, client experience has topped the list. Making sure that you can create a better customer experience has been number one. So I thought it was very interesting here that it's not too far down the list, but it is fraud losses and the looming threat of regulatory oversight that is driving the business cases for the evolution of real-time payments fraud control frameworks here. As we look at the types of solutions out there, the scam solution ecosystem is still a bit nascent. We still do see that as we ask institutions about their satisfaction with various solutions, customer education still tops the list. Although if you go back to the extent to which customer education is actually resonating with the customer, I'm not sure that should top the list at this point. Transactional monitoring risk engines, that definitely, looking at the anomalous behavior, that is another one that is being used. But I think as you look at, some of the green bars of just all of the other tools that are at financial institutions' disposal that they still do not use, and that's all of the green there, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Dark web threat intelligence, the ability to understand the extent to which identities are being actively trafficked in the dark web, being used to establish mule accounts. That's one that, again, is higher up on the list, but I think there's still lots of opportunity for that. And we'll get to collaboration, but I think collaboration, the bad guys collaborate, and there's lots of opportunities for us to do a better job of that as well in the solution category. As we look at some of the top priorities for making substantive changes versus just minor ongoing tweaks to control frameworks among financial institutions. Authentication solutions top the list. This has been the case for the last couple of years that we've done this sort of solution, this sort of survey, and I think it is a recognition of the fact that that there are so many solutions out there now that can help to evolve the security of the authentication experience as well as the customer experience. And again, those two go hand in hand with business cases, but looking to evolve past things that create a lot of friction and aren't really effective. I'll pick on KBA with that one. To present a much better customer experience and a more secure customer experience. And while the ATO vendor and solution ecosystem is much more mature than the scam ecosystem, FI still have a lot of room for growth on this front as well. And so as you look at kind of the satisfaction levels with a variety of solutions to help with real-time payments, I think, as you look at transaction monitoring engines, that's top of the list. I was pleasantly pleased to see mobile app push notifications as high as they were in terms of satisfaction level, although as you look at that 43% of those that are not using it yet, there's lots of opportunity to still get this highly secure method of authentication more broadly deployed. Machine learning models, device fingerprinting, all of these surface very high from a ATO perspective. But again, as you look at the green bars on the right side, that also speaks to a lot of opportunity for folks to deploy some of the tried and true technologies that can be very helpful with ATO. And then as you look at the ability to upscale what we're doing, I will go back and I will re-emphasize the fact that as we look at evolving our capabilities to address real-time payments fraud, it's not just about the send side, it's also about the receive side. And so we have seen a number of institutions looking to up their game on what they're doing relative to mule detection, mule activity. I think this is one of our key opportunities going forward, is looking for the ability to remove the fraudsters' capability to exit these funds from the system. And we have seen that these investments have increased in the wake of the pandemic. Many institutions are taking a greater interest in tracking, detecting, and preventing mule activity. It's still disturbing that so many consumers don't understand that being asked to move money is a sign of a scam or illicit activity. The two bullets on the right side here came from a study that Lloyd's did in the UK market late last year. And as I've talked about these with some of our North American clients, many of them would say that it's probably not 1 in 10 consumers in North America between the ages of 18 and 24 who would move money through their account in exchange for a percentage of the funds. They posit that it would be probably 3 to 4 consumers out of 10 that would do this. So there's still lots of opportunities from an education perspective to help everybody in the ecosystem to up their game. Collaboration, I think, is a key opportunity here from the perspective of the ability to detect mules, to detect scams. We're all in this together. And to the extent where we can leverage shared data about device reputation, email reputation, about looking into associations that can potentially indicate that this is a mule herder who is going into multiple different accounts. That's really kind of our opportunity to take this lopsided game of chess that we've been playing, where the bad guys have 3 moves for every one that we have, and even the odds a little bit. Because the scam problem will continue to worsen. It's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And mule detection is one of the key engines to help to stem the scam apocalypse. And collaboration both within financial institutions, across various silos, and across financial institutions, I think are one of our key opportunities to get ahead of this curve. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott to talk about how Outsier can help on some of these fronts.
Thanks, Julie. That was terrific, super interesting, and really appreciate all the insights you shared with us. I'm actually going to just have 3 quick slides about your last slide, which was scams, mules, and collaboration, and talk a little bit about Outsier. I mean, one of the reasons we actually commissioned this report was that customer authentication and payment fraud prevention is really in our DNA. And scams are one of the rising concerns that a lot of our clients have, and as you indicated, are one of the most challenging issues that financial institutions face. And so, starting with scams, really the key here is there's no bulletproof solution. There is no one solution that solves this. A layered defense is the only way to address it. And ATO, you talked about this as a rising concern, and as you look at scams, I mean, one of the very first things that we recommend is make sure that it's not a compromised account before you go into the different mitigation capabilities to preventing that. We really believe that authentication is not just a front door technology, it's something that leverages throughout the entire customer journey. So certainly you want to make sure that the account hasn't been compromised as you're doing your risk profiling. But you do want to risk score, take a look for anomalies and other signals. I'll talk a little bit about behavior biometrics, where that can plug into a platform, for example, for risk mitigation. But there's also other signals that are indicators of risk and scams as well. You can't fight what you don't track. One of the things that Julie spoke about was reporting on APP fraud. So that's something that's really critically important, is being able to case mark and track when you have confirmed that a scam occurred. Education of customers, even though the effectiveness remains kind of mid tier in terms of effectiveness, it's still something that has to be out there in terms of an overall approach, a layered approach to addressing scams. And then finally, we're talking with some of our customers, and we're looking at enhancing some of our current capabilities around customer nudging for higher risk transactions. So this isn't something you would ever want to do on every transaction, because people start to get immune to those kinds of pop-ups. But if it's a very occasional, and when it provides additional context on the transaction, so as an example, are you sending this payment to a relative, that can provide additional value. From a mule's perspective, tracking where the money goes is one of the most effective ways to address potential scams. The money has to get out of the system for the fraudsters to be successful. So certainly risk profiling, again, here is something that's extremely important, and starting to consider this on not only the sending side, but on the receiving side for mule activities and profiling where that money is flowing to. Within our own Outsier Global Data Network, we have ability to share mule account intelligence with other organizations. We're looking at other ways that we can improve this as well. We have dark web intelligence that identifies mule accounts that have been confirmed to be used to transfer funds. And then finally, we put facts in there so that you can really track and implement policies around mule accounts, especially around things like the beneficiary. So that can be transaction velocity as well as unusual amounts, in addition to kind of list management. From a collaboration perspective, I mean, this is where knowledge is power, and sharing and working with your peers is really important. There's kind of 2 avenues of that we have within Outsier, but it's really an important vector for defense against these kinds of attacks. And for us, it's the Global Data Network. There's a number of different kinds of data fields that we allow our customers to share, ranging from hashed international bank accounts to mobile identifiers, device fingerprints, as well as IP addresses and others, indicators of high risk. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have fraud intelligence that leverages the dark web. it was one of the indicators that Julie spoke to earlier in terms of adoptions of techniques to fight fraud. Dark web payments fraud intelligence is something that we have that can identify mule accounts, bad IP address, compromised email accounts, all of which can help you in your fight against both scams, identifying mules, and real-time payment fraud. And as you look at all of these different kinds of techniques, it's just really, I can't emphasize enough how this is a layered approach. It combines authentication, it combines machine learning risk scoring, it combines policy management, and it combines the orchestration of many different signals into your approach as you mitigate the transfer of financial income. And so when you're sending money from one account to another, this is the point of risk within the organization. And so what you'll see on the left here are a number of different kinds of signals. We talk to a lot of our customers both about signals that we provide and signals that we work with, like behavior biometrics. This is a signal that we can easily integrate into our risk engine. It's one of the things that is rising, but then of course it's just one of many tools that you can approach. Dark web intelligence can be used to profile and create new policies, especially around known lists of compromised accounts. And then essentially you have a flow so that you do a check, you score the transaction, you check your policy, and then you can mitigate based on the risk associated with that transaction, whether it's a step-up authentication, whether that's a customer nudge, and then based on the outcome, you can go ahead and process that transaction, or you can hold it or deny it based on that overall risk. And then of course, having a robust case management capability so that you can mark the outcomes, provide that feedback into your risk engine that improves the performance and scoring over time. So that's really from a perspective of Outseer. We're very focused on payment fraud prevention. That's been in our core for a long time, as well as that combining customer authentication, which was where we really got our start, is around risk-based authentication and putting that all together to fight many of these evolving threats. So, you know, with that in mind, that does bring us to the end of the webinar where we can actually take some questions, and we have some questions already queued up here, but I did want to kind of point everybody to the actual report. So Aite, we worked with Aite for this report. It's Faster Payments, Faster Frauds. You can actually download that from our website. We do have an upcoming webinar talking specifically about scams, which we kind of highlighted here, and some of the things that we're doing about that. But perhaps I can turn it over to Stephanie to queue up some of the questions. It seems like we've had some good interaction from the group here in terms of providing us with additional questions.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you both. We do have some questions that have come in. So I will start with this first one. I saw behavioral biometrics as a possible risk mitigation approach. How would that help in the case of APP?
So I can start there, and I'll welcome Scott to chime in. You know, I think when we talk to financial institutions, the best indicator that it has is with those urgency-based scams. So where you've got the fraudster trying to get the grandmother to send the bail money to get the grandson out of the fictional jail. And you've got the fraudster on the phone with the grandmother as she is engaging with either the mobile app or the online session. Yeah, so as you look at that in terms of, you know, a red flag, that's a really, really red flag. You know, as I've talked to financial institutions, you know, there's some thought that behavioral biometrics can also show different patterns of interaction as somebody is being coached through a session, you know, greater time on page, hesitation. The latter category, I'm hearing mixed results. To be quite honest, is, you know, I'm not really hearing that that's necessarily a clear and present flag that is super indicative. But in terms of those urgency-based scams, I am hearing that, you know, again, that on the call plus being in session, that's helpful.
Yeah, and maybe I can even just put our perspective is that we work with some of our clients on integrating behavior biometric signal, and in fact, We were just in India in a session discussing some of these results. And I guess the preference and the sensitivity is around false positives and how deterministic is the data. So the more deterministic the behavior biometric signal you can get, the better. And so like I'll put into that category like bot detection as an example, but you can take a look at deviations from normal user behavior within the session of how they typically use it. Are they coming from a common location? Are they doing it at a normal time of day? Do they make payments? Have they made payments to this user before? As it gets to more kind of on the edge type of behavioral signals, there's still, I'd say, they're testing the lift versus false positive. So that's the kind of balance, is saying how much signal can I get in here that provides me with valuable lift in terms of catching fraud, with the balance of the friction it introduces through false positives. So that's kind of, so it's absolutely something people are using, and they're looking at how can I get the most deterministic signals in here.
Okay, thank you. We do have a number of questions coming in, so I will go to the next one. Thanks for this really interesting webinar. Do you recover also PAN card number while monitoring the dark web?
I think this one's for me. This is on our dark web intelligence. We do have a card number intelligence. That is a different part of this service. But when we were talking just about real-time payments, that wasn't the specific, relevant signal for the real-time payment movement. But yes, our dark web intelligence does cover that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Julie and Scott, this may be for both of you, but this is more an observation. It said just one observation. There is only one real-time payment, RTP TCH rail in the US. Yet references to fraud on multiple rails may be incorrect. Zelle is a payment channel. RTP is a payment rail. FedNow will be another example of faster payments. It maybe just needs some clarification in terms of referencing that the US has high fraud rates. Wonder if either one of you wanted to maybe comment on that or clarify this observation.
Yeah, so I can start with that one, and actually there are more, because we do have Visa and MasterCard that have push payments over that are real time over their rails. So there's we've got a variety in this market. Although I don't think we're seeing a ton of fraud over the Visa and MasterCard push payment rails just yet. As I said in my comments earlier, Zelle can settle over either ACH or RTP. And as we have surveyed and interviewed financial institutions, we are seeing that there are high rates of increase in real-time payments fraud in the North American market, regardless of what that settlement method is. So it's definitely something. Again, the fraudsters are taking their tried and true methods that they have worked out in the UK, and they are just applying them across the globe with great success, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. Another question has come in. Fraudsters adopting enhanced refined attacks, so do applications need to evolve to adopt countermeasures. How is Outseer responding to modernize its offering to support distributed architecture? With monoliths becoming difficult to maintain and sustain, distributed architecture has become more common.
Yeah, so I mean, we have both on-premise as well as cloud infrastructure, and we have an orchestration kind of platform ability. One of the things I spoke about earlier was the ability to take inputs from multiple signals. That's one of the ways that we're modernizing our platform, is that our risk engine as well as our policy engine can take different kinds of evolving signals so that we can both profile and understand the lift with those, and the I think I mentioned this when I was talking about behavior biometrics, is that balance between lift and friction. And so from a false positives perspective. So we do have a modern architecture that can be implemented in the cloud that can also orchestrate third-party signals and customer data as well. And so that's something that we're always striving to improve. We're looking at ways that we can more rapidly integrate other signals, as well as build in our own new capabilities for profiling things like evolving threats for scams and detecting mule accounts and integrating new data. So that's certainly something that's at our core and something that we're always looking to do.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I think we have time for one last question as we are closing in on the hour. How do you see the line being drawn for consumer versus bank liabilities for scams 1 to 3 years out?
That's a loaded question. I do think that we are seeing that, again, what starts in the UK doesn't stay in the UK. And I think that what we are seeing in terms of kind of that shared liability, looking at increasing the liability for banks, and not just the sending banks, but also the receiving banks. I think we're going to see that playing out in jurisdictions around the globe. We've got, this, like I said in my earlier comments, the CFPB has signaled that we're going to see something in the US. There's something that's working its way through the Canadian Parliament. Singapore has something going through. So I do think that we are going to see those liability shifts become more common over the next couple of years.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. So with that, I do believe we are coming to the close of our question and answer session. Thank you very much for all of the questions. If one happened to come through that we were unable to answer, which I believe we answered them all, but if we did not, we will follow up directly with you. As Scott mentioned, our upcoming webinar is From Scam to Cash Out, July 26th. You can register for that on our website and also on the Bright Talk platform. We wanted to thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you very much to Scott and to Julie Conroy for being presenters for our webinar. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Bye-bye.